stack here in what's now Workspace 5.0 with a fun little homemade plasma globe. And in this episode, I'm going to show you how I made this. Since this project involves high voltage, I'm going to say you probably shouldn't try this at home, even though I did this at home. But I built one so you don't have to. This here is a pretty classic type of plasma globe filled with a mixture of neon and xenon. The xenon giving the blue color to the lightning, and the neon giving these distinct reddish pinkish pads. Now, I've already taken the screws out of the base, so I'll show you what's inside one of these. Should probably turn this off. Pretty simple driver board with a high voltage transformer. Usually these put out about 10 to 15,000 volts, which is doing a little better than the coaster that I've been using for lighting stuff. So what I plan to do with that is use this to power my own handmade plasma globes. This is a big LED light bulb, and I'm going to be turning it into a plasma globe. So first thing is to take off this metal screw base. And there's this little rubber insulator in here, and a little LED driver circuit. So let's see if I can get all the crumbly crud out. And this goopy crud. One little driver board. And I'm actually seeing chips on this, so it's probably either working as a buck converter or just has a simple current regulator in there. This is worth exploring later on. Until then, one thing I found out, surprisingly enough, even though it's full of LEDs, it doesn't have any of the worries that tungsten filaments would have. This bulb is still under a partial vacuum. You can see the LED is lighting up, but hopefully you can also see the purple sparks going on inside there. Maybe not on the camera. So the next thing I'm going to do is open up the bulb and take these LEDs out. A silicon carbide grinding bit, safety glasses. Actually, I should probably release the vacuum inside the bulb first. That's the hiss of the vacuum being released. Slow this down. This is vibrating more than I'm comfortable with. And that's bouncing around more than I'm comfortable with. Yeah. Clean some of the dust off. I don't want that getting inside the bulb because then it's a pain in the neck to get back out. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? There we go. Okay, I'm gonna need to widen that just a bit. Shake out the dust. Squish the wires a little. Here we go. Gently extract the filaments. Well, LED fake filaments. Here we go. There's the bulb. I just need to do a little bit of cleanup with this gunky stuff. Okay, that should be enough. And that should have left the glass right around the edge here roughed up just enough for the epoxy to stick to it well. So now we've got a little bit of glass blowing to do to make the center electrode and attach the fill stem and all of that. So here I have a Pyrex tube that I already blew a bubble in the end of several months ago, and it just happened to be, well, pretty close to what I need anyway, so I'm just going to do a little bit of glass blowing to make this a little more suitable for what I'm trying to do here. Okay, it's a little off-center, but I'm afraid I'm gonna break it if I try to center. Well, okay, let's give it a try. Screw it. Let's give it a try. All right, it's a little bit oblong, but it's a lot more centered. So hopefully that'll work. So I'm gonna let this cool, then I'm gonna clean it off and get on with the rest of this project. Something that's important to test before I get too far along with this is whether this is actually going to hold a vacuum. If the glass walls here are too thin, then this could shatter when I pull a vacuum on it, which, if it's inside the plasma globe, that would be a disaster. So, jam the vacuum line up in here. Turn on the plasma globe supply high voltage. Let's pump this down and see what happens. Okay, that wasn't a flaw in the glass, but the tube not fitting all the way. But it did get down to the point it started glowing, so this will survive a vacuum. Wow, that's way too big. Okay. Okay. This does just barely fit. So, check the distance to the center, because I want this to be roughly centered. Gonna mark that on here. Yikes. And very carefully try to extract that. So right down here is the area that I want to rough up for the epoxy. I'm gonna cut off the tube Probably right about there. There we go. So the final piece is going to be the fill stem. And I just have a scrap piece of flint glass tubing I'm going to use for that. That has a little bent end in it because I was messing around with it earlier. That's might actually help grip the epoxy. So I'm going to rough it up over here. Okay, now it has a rough area for the epoxy to grip onto. And I'm going to flame polish the ends of it. Alright, now both ends of this tube are nice and smooth. Okay, to stick this together, I'm going to use some two-part epoxy. This is just the cheapest clear two-part epoxy that I found at the hardware store. Oddly enough, this actually holds vacuum. That should be about enough there. The tricky part is actually waiting for the epoxy to get just set enough that these stay together. Be back in a minute when these are sticking together properly. Okay, so I dipped the bottom of the light bulb into the epoxy, and it looks like that was setting up. But the stuff that I'd scooped onto these pieces here wasn't. Alright, just gonna do the best I can. Is that even in the frame? Yeah, it's barely in the frame. Okay. So it looks like I need to make a second batch of epoxy. I think I had similar problems when I made the smaller plasma globe, so... Hold that in place, and I will be back when this sets up. Okay, it's set up enough that everything's holding its shape. So the next thing I'm going to do, just mix up a little more epoxy and start trying to fill in any gaps. And it's just runny enough to get itself all over the surface of the light bulb. I'll clean that up later with some acetone. The important thing here is to make sure there are no leaks. It might even be useful while the epoxy is still runny to pull a weak partial vacuum on this. I'm going to make sure that any tension on this is pushing it towards center. Okay. That is telling me that there is a major leak in this. So I can't even pull a very weak partial vacuum on this. Well, I'm just going to have to wait till this cures and then find out where the leak is. The leaks have been sealed. The epoxy has had time to at least set up, if not cure completely. So one of the things it kind of ended up being an afterthought is I should probably bend the fill stem so it's not sticking out so precariously. Now the fill stem is bent to a slightly easier to handle angle. I can attach the vacuum line back to it. And stuff the steel wool in. Smush it into the upper globe, or the inner globe. That should be good for now. So slip this onto the power supply, like so. Okay, it's under a bit more tension than I had hoped it was. High voltage on. Vacuum on. I'm going to very slowly bring down the pressure because I don't know if this bulb will even handle it. There it is! First light. First light of the plasma globe. Would you look at that? And that's just ordinary purple air glow. There it is. Okay, let's turn off the vacuum pump so maybe you can hear me. Now that I have a handmade plasma globe, I'll be able to show you some experiments in the future with putting different gases in it at different pressures. Is just ordinary air like this. On my camera's preview screen, this is funny because it looks like bluish purple. It's actually more of a hot pink in person, and when I get this to the computer to actually edit the video, who knows what color it's even going to look. But yeah, there it is, DIY plasma globe. You know, just for the heck of it, let's backfill this with some helium. That was a little more violently than I wanted. Let's drag the pressure back down until it re-illuminates. Oop, here goes, here goes. Yeah, the fill tube is small enough and the volume of the globe is large enough that the pressure reading on my gauge is actually ahead of what's going on in the globe. Yeah, helium, somewhat brighter. Can the camera even see this? Ooh, yeah. Pressure's too high, though. Oh well, let's just drag the pressure way down again. That is so neat.